The studio audience of 200 people was waiting for applause. But Steve Harvey quietly walked off the stage, approached that woman, and said, "Would you read it?" That moment changed everything. The cameras were rolling. The lights were hot. The Family Feud board glowed blue behind him. But Steve Harvey wasn't looking at any of it. He was looking at a woman in the third row, clutching a piece of paper like it was the last piece of her husband she had left. And in many ways it was. This is the story of the day Steve Harvey broke every rule of television, stopped a show mid-recording, and reminded the world that some moments are bigger than entertainment. Some moments demand silence. Some moments demand humanity. Subscribe now, because what happens next will break you and rebuild you in ways you never expected. It started like any other taping of Family Feud. The Johnson family versus the Martinez family. Standard questions. Standard energy. Steve was in his element. Quick wit, sharp timing, that signature mustache working overtime with every reaction. The audience was laughing. The families were competing. Everything was going according to script. But in the third row, someone wasn't laughing. Her name was Angela Carter. 52 years old. Graying hair pulled back in a simple bun. Navy blue dress that looked like it had been ironed with trembling hands. She sat perfectly still while everyone around her clapped and cheered. Her eyes weren't on Steve Harvey. They weren't on the game. They were on the letter in her lap. A letter her husband had written 3 weeks before he died. No one in the studio knew this yet. Not the producers. Not the crew. Not Steve. But they were about to find out in a way that would stop the entire production cold. The Johnsons had just won the round. Steve was setting up the next question, joking with the family, keeping the energy high. That's when he saw her. In a sea of faces, something about Angela's stillness caught his attention. While everyone else was animated, she was frozen. While everyone else was present, she looked like she was somewhere else entirely. Steve paused mid-sentence. It was subtle at first. Just a half-second hesitation that most people wouldn't notice. But the crew noticed. The producers noticed. And Angela noticed. Their eyes met across the studio. Steve stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. He didn't explain. He didn't announce anything. He just handed the microphone to his assistant and started walking toward the audience. The producers scrambled. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't planned. The game was still live. They had a schedule to keep. But Steve Harvey wasn't thinking about schedules anymore. He was thinking about that woman's eyes. And the letter in her hands. The walk from the stage to the third row took maybe 15 seconds. But in those 15 seconds, the entire energy of the studio shifted. The laughter stopped. The families on stage went quiet. 200 people held their breath as Steve Harvey, one of the biggest personalities in television, walked past cameras and crew and lights to reach a woman no one had noticed until that moment. He knelt down in front of her seat. The cameras were still rolling, but at this point, no one cared about the footage. They cared about what was happening. "Ma'am," Steve said softly. His voice was different now. Not the booming game show host's voice. Something quieter. Something real. "I see you. I see that letter. Would you like to share what's happening?" Angela looked up at him. Her eyes were already wet. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out at first. She looked down at the letter. Her hands were shaking. "It's from my husband," she finally whispered. "He died 6 weeks ago. Cancer. He wrote this before he passed. He told me to bring it here. To Family Feud. He said Steve Harvey would understand." The silence in that studio was profound. You could hear the air conditioning. You could hear someone's phone vibrate 3 rows back. You could hear Angela's breath catching in her throat. Steve didn't move. He stayed kneeling in front of her, one hand gently resting on the armrest of her seat. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't try to make it lighter. He just stayed there. "What was his name?" Steve asked. "Marcus," Angela said. "Marcus Carter. We were married 31 years. Steve nodded slowly. 31 years. That's a love that doesn't just disappear. That's a love that writes letters. That's a love that keeps talking even when the voice is gone. Angela's face crumpled. The tears came harder now. She clutched the letter against her chest. Would you read it? Steve asked. Would you read what Marcus wanted to say? Behind the scenes, producers were making frantic gestures. They had a schedule. They had other families waiting. They had network guidelines about time and content and pacing. But Steve Harvey wasn't looking at them. He was looking at Angela. And in that moment, Angela was the only person who mattered. She nodded. Slowly. Carefully. Like she was afraid the letter might dissolve if she moved too quickly. Steve stood up and turned to the audience. Y'all need to hear this, he said. His voice was steady, but you could hear the emotion underneath it. We're going to stop everything. We're going to listen. Because this is more important than any game. Behind the scenes, Steve made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. He walked back to the stage, grabbed a stool, and brought it down to Angela's row. He set it right in front of her, sat down, and said, Take your time. We've got all the time you need. The studio stayed silent. The Martinez family had tears in their eyes. The Johnson family was holding hands. Even the crew members, people who'd seen thousands of tapings, were standing still with glistening eyes. Angela unfolded the letter. Her hands were still shaking. The paper looked worn, like she'd read it 100 times already. Maybe she had. Maybe she'd memorized every word. But reading it out loud was different. Reading it in front of 200 people was different. Reading it to Steve Harvey was different. She took a breath. And she began. My beautiful Angela, she read. Her voice was soft but clear. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And if you're reading this at Family Feud, it means you kept your promise. You always kept your promises. She paused. Wiped her eyes. Steve didn't interrupt. He just sat there, leaning forward slightly, fully present. I'm writing this because I need you to know something. I need everyone to know something. Life isn't about how long you live. It's about how much you love. And baby, we loved so much. 31 years wasn't enough. 100 years wouldn't have been enough. But what we had was real. What we built was permanent. Angela's voice broke. She stopped reading for a moment, pressing the letter to her heart. Steve reached out and gently touched her knee. Not forceful. Not intrusive. Just a presence that said, I'm here. You're not alone. I want you to laugh again. Angela continued reading. I want you to watch Family Feud and remember how we used to yell at the TV together. Remember how we always knew the answers before the families did? Remember how you'd make fun of Steve's suits and I'd defend them? At that, a few people in the audience let out small, tearful laughs. Even Steve cracked a slight smile, his eyes wet. But most of all, I want you to live. Don't just exist without me. Live. Laugh. Love again if you find it. Because that's not betraying me. That's honoring me. That's showing the world what I always knew, that love doesn't end. It just changes shape. The letter had more, but Angela couldn't read anymore. Her shoulders shook with sobs. Steve immediately stood up and pulled her into a hug. A real hug. Not a television hug. Not a photo op. A hug that said, Your pain matters. Your love matters. Your husband matters. The audience erupted. Not in applause. In catharsis. People were crying openly. The families on stage were embracing each other. Strangers were holding hands. The crew members were wiping their faces. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. Steve pulled back from the hug, still holding Angela's hands. He looked at her with an intensity that silenced the room again. For 30 seconds, no one spoke. The studio existed in a pocket of suspended time where grief and love occupied the same space without conflict. Angela's tears fell onto the letter, blurring some of the ink, but she didn't try to hide them anymore. She didn't apologize. She just existed in her pain, surrounded by people who had stopped pretending everything was okay. Marcus knew something, Steve said. He knew that love is the only thing we take with us. The only thing that outlasts us. And he knew that you needed to be reminded of that. Not by me. By all of us. By this moment. By this community. He turned to the audience. Every single person in this room has loved someone. Every single person watching at home has loved someone. And Angela's story? That's not just her story. That's our story. That's the human story. Steve then did something extraordinary. He took off his jacket, his signature gray suit jacket, and draped it over Angela's shoulders. This is yours now, he said. Not because it's expensive. Not because it's mine. But because I want you to have something from today. Something that reminds you that you walked into this studio carrying grief, and you walked out carrying community. Marcus wanted you here. And now you know why. The weight of the jacket on her shoulders felt like an embrace. Like Marcus's arms one more time. Like the 31 years they built together materializing into something she could touch, could hold, could take home. She pulled it tighter around herself. Angela looked at the jacket, then at Steve, then at the letter still in her hands. She laughed through her tears. It was a small laugh. A broken laugh. But it was a laugh. The first real laugh she'd had in 6 weeks. Steve sat back down on the stool. He looked at the cameras. He looked at the families. He looked at the crew. We're not finishing the game today, he said. This is the game. This is the point. Not the points on the board. Not the prize money. This connection. This humanity. This love. Share this video and subscribe, because this story needs to be never forgotten. The producers didn't argue. They couldn't. What they just witnessed was bigger than television. It was bigger than ratings or schedules or network guidelines. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered human connection in a medium that often forgets what that looks like. After the cameras stopped rolling, Steve stayed with Angela for another 40 minutes. The audience didn't leave. The families didn't leave. Everyone stayed. They talked. They shared stories. Angela told them about Marcus. About their life. About the little things that made 31 years feel both like a lifetime and like no time at all. Steve gave Angela his personal phone number. He told her to call him anytime she needed to talk. He told her that grief isn't something you get over. It's something you get through. And you don't have to get through it alone. 3 months later, Angela sent Steve a package. Inside was a framed photo of her and Marcus from their wedding day. On the back, she'd written, "He was right. You understood. Thank you for giving his love a stage." Steve keeps that photo in his office. Not as a trophy. Not as a reminder of a viral moment. But as a reminder of why he does what he does. Not for the laughs. Not for the fame. But for the moments when entertainment becomes something more. When a game show stage becomes sacred ground. When stopping the show becomes the whole point of the show. The episode never aired in its original form. But clips of that moment spread across social media like wildfire. Millions of views. Thousands of comments. People sharing their own stories of loss and love. People thanking Steve for showing them that it's okay to stop. It's okay to sit with pain. It's okay to let humanity interrupt the script. And Angela? She still has Steve's jacket. She wears it sometimes when she watches Family Feud. When she does, she holds Marcus's letter in her lap. And she laughs at the answers. Just like they used to. Because that's what Marcus wanted. Not for her to forget. But for her to remember that love doesn't end when the heart stops. It just finds new ways to speak. New stages. New audiences. New moments where 200 people hold their breath and remember what it means to be human. Steve Harvey could have kept the show going that day. He could have followed the script. He could have put entertainment over humanity. But he didn't. He stopped. He knelt. He listened. He held space for grief in a place designed for laughter. And in doing so, he reminded everyone watching that the best television isn't scripted. It's surrendered. It's the moment when we stop performing and start being present. That's the legacy of that day. Not a game show moment. A human moment. And it changed everyone who witnessed it. Because sometimes, the most important thing a host can do is stop hosting and start being human. That jacket still hangs in Angela's closet. The letter still rests in her hands. And Marcus's love still speaks. Not through words on a page, but through the moment Steve Harvey chose humanity over entertainment. The moment 200 people remembered what truly matters. The moment a game show became a sanctuary. Share this story. Subscribe. And remember, love never ends. It just finds new stages.